Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. I'm Cindy Munson. I represent House District 85 in Oklahoma City, Nichols Hills, and the Village. I'm also the House Democratic Leader. We'll give a quick response to the governor's state of the state and then also introduce you to our policy agenda and the items that we'll be working on in this upcoming legislative session. And to help me with that is Representative Melissa Provenzano and Representative Trish Ranson. You all were in the chamber. Quite a journey to get to where we were on the state of the state. A little confused at first on where exactly the governor was going to go with all the Bible verses and his personal philosophies on how we can take care of Oklahomans when his job is to be, as the lieutenant governor said, the chief executive officer of the state of Oklahoma, meaning he's in government and he has to figure out a way to have government all Oklahomans across the state of Oklahoma. There are two questions he left us with when he was closing his State of the State address. One, who influences us and what legacy will we leave behind? I love the question on who will influence us or who influences us. Based on his comments and his address to the House and the Senate, he talked a lot about policies that help the wealthiest Oklahomans, not everyday average working Oklahomans and Oklahoma families. He demonstrated to us how out of touch he is with the needs of our constituents. He talked about cutting the state income tax and that he is on a path to a 0% income tax. Of course, we know in just a week ago, we were voting on a 0.25% income tax cut that we know does not help the average Oklahoman. Those of us who make a middle income somewhere between $47,000 and $55,000 a year would barely get $100 back a year. But the wealthiest 1% in Oklahoma, that top earner would receive over $2,300 a year. So who does that income tax cut actually help? At a $250 million hit to our state budget, how can we invest in Oklahoma and invest in Oklahomans and ensure that our children's future is bright, that we have a strong and thriving workforce, and that we do the things that we actually stood up and celebrated with him when it comes to helping formerly incarcerated Oklahomans, taking away fines and fees and court costs that actually keep Oklahomans behind as opposed to getting them back in their communities and back in the workforce. He talked about a sustainable budget. In order for us to have a sustainable budget, we have to have sustainable revenue. I joined the legislature in 2016. This is my 9th legislative session, and in my first 3 years, we suffered a $1.5 billion deficit. Drastic cuts were being made every day at the state capitol. I don't know if you all remember, but there were thousands of teachers who walked out in 2018, many who are standing in this caucus and standing with me today, who said it is unacceptable to cut funding to public education, meaning you're cutting opportunities for Oklahoma's children and Oklahoma's future. So there's no way we can cut income taxes and continue to invest in Oklahoma. He talked about flat budgets and calling on agencies to submit budget requests to us that are flat. A flat budget is a cut. There's something called inflation. There's something called fixed costs. You have to operate as an agency. For some of these folks, they're not growing government. They are simply doing the very basic needs of our Oklahomans and providing services that are so vital to everyday working people across the state of Oklahoma. He celebrated the parental choice voucher scheme that the Republicans passed and worked so hard on last legislative session. We know he has an interest to eliminate the cap on those vouchers, and that's certainly something we will fight against. And those are taxpayer dollars that he wants to go back to those who don't need it, who are already sending their children to private schools. We need to invest in public education, keeping public dollars in public schools. He talked about higher education and consolidation. You can't build a workforce if you don't have opportunities for students to get trained and to be highly skilled and prepared for the workforce that he's asking for. Right now is the time to invest in higher education after years and years of drastic cuts to our universities and institutions across the state, both our flagship universities and our rural institutions. There are movements being made right now in the legislature to address deferred maintenance, making sure our buildings are safe for students to be in, for our professors to be in, to prepare for the workforce that he's talking about. He talked about less taxes, more taxpayers. If he wants to do that, then the extremist legislation has to end. The rhetoric around those who come to the United States on immigration, quote unquote, securing the border, is unacceptable, and it has to end. He has There's nothing he can do when it comes to securing the border. He can run for Congress or something like that. All my colleagues that stood up, I had to make a comment and say, are you running for Congress? Because there's not much we can do in the legislature. And so that question on who influences us, great question, because these are not the issues that are coming up on the doorstep when we knock doors in our districts all across the state. His continued conflict with tribal leaders is unacceptable. His comparison to what's happening in Arizona to Oklahoma is unacceptable. Our tribal leaders and tribal nations are great partners with the state of Oklahoma, who do invest in public schools, who do invest in roads and bridges, and who do invest in health care. And so we personally took offense to that because we know of the great work that they're doing across the state of Oklahoma. And they are a shining light of what it looks like to invest in yourself and invest in your government and invest in your people. So what legacy will we leave behind? It's always a great question, I think, for all of us to have at the forefront of our mind when we're thinking about the upcoming legislative session that we serve in. And my hope is that his legacy will be to invest in Oklahomans, to actually help those who need it the most, not cut the very services that allow people to live a healthy life and to have the highest quality of life possible. If we want businesses to come to Oklahoma, if we want jobs to be available for every Oklahoman, then we have to do better when it comes to investing in ourselves. What he provided for us today was a very grim look at what could happen to Oklahoma when we take away important investments like the income tax to our state budget. And so with that, we want to share what we believe, what we will put forward in this upcoming legislative session and what we believe will help Oklahomans. So I'll turn it over to Representative Provenzano.
Hello. Melissa Provenzano, House District 79 out of Tulsa. I'm the Assistant Minority Lead for the Democratic Caucus. The House Democratic Caucus believes Oklahomans deserve better. This legislative session, House Democrats will be focused on improving the lives of working Oklahomans and their families, as well as bringing remedy and reason to harmful legislation. Lowering costs for working families is one of our top priorities. Putting food on the table is more expensive than ever. Our focus will include the elimination of the state portion of the sales tax on groceries, increasing the earned income tax credit and child care tax credit, and expanding the state sales tax relief credit. Next, public dollars belong in public schools, period. It's the best investment for the overwhelming majority of Oklahoma kids and their parents who choose public schools every day, over 700,000 kids and growing. Investing in public schools means 700,000 kids are getting what they need, enough food to eat so they can focus on learning, wraparound supports for kids who benefit from the access that mental health providers bring, and requiring transparency from the State Department of Education and how exactly they are spending our state dollars. Right now, that's a big question mark, and we deserve better. We need to know that those dollars are reaching the classroom. A highly skilled workforce is essential to grow our economy. 325,000 jobs this past quarter alone were created in the nation. House Democrats will prioritize growing a diverse and highly skilled workforce. Let's expand the Oklahoma's Promise program to include more students with disabilities and increase access to career tech and vocational schools so that we can meet the workforce demands of critical occupations. These things are doable, practical, solution-driven, and not too much to expect from the Oklahoma legislature. But we can do even more. For that, I now turn it over to Democratic Caucus Chair Trish Ransom.
It's like a dance back and forth. Thank you, Representative Provenzano. Trish Ransom, House District 34 in Stillwater, Chair of the Democratic Caucus. What we can go forward is with protecting our health care freedom. House Democrats are also working to protect health care freedom. We have introduced legislation to give Oklahoma citizens a say on reproductive health care freedom and address maternal mortality crisis that we are having in our state. Health care should be accessible to all Oklahomans and should cover a comprehensive list of health care needs for all. And personal and private decisions should remain between patients and their physicians without government interference. We believe that we need to defend our democracy. House Democrats have and will continue to defend our democracy and our democratic processes. We value the Constitution, which outlines freedom of speech and religious freedom, so we will continue to push back on legislation that undermines those important principles. Over the years, there have been efforts to make voting more difficult for the average Oklahoman. House Democrats have introduced legislation to expand early voting dates, protect the initiative petition, and restore voting rights for all Oklahomans. We have today basically a tale of two Oklahomas. We have what we heard from the governor. He has laid out the benefits and the opportunity for, which basically is the few that have the means to navigate our society on their own. Then the other side of the Oklahoma is the everyday working Oklahomans who need help in some way to make sure that they get to that next level. We as House Democrats believe that Oklahomans deserve better. This idea of flat budgets, the idea of we're doing good, it sounds like Oklahoma is just okay. And we have the opportunity to be better. We see it, we believe it, we know that by key investments, we can make Oklahoma better. We deserve, as Oklahomans, paychecks that stretch further each month. We deserve quality public schools in every zip code. We deserve access to higher ed and jobs that are as diverse as our population and to value the diversity that we all bring. We deserve to be able to make our own health decisions and regain bodily autonomy for roughly 50% of the Oklahomans in this state. And we deserve a transparent and efficient government of the people, for the people, and by the people. We have the ideas and we have the resolve to advocate for those needs and push back on harmful policies that we know we will see yet again this session. Because, as I said, Oklahomans deserve better. Open it up to questions.
With all of the success we've seen in other states around abortion, constitutional amendments, are you saying you're going to get something before the voters, or are you trying to do something here before it gets to that point?
We do have a joint resolution. I have a bill that will present. I actually introduced it last legislative session, and it didn't receive a hearing in committee, so this year we will push to see if it can pass committee and be heard on the floor.
I got another question.
Okay.
Has your
Tell me your
caucus,
name. I'm so sorry.
Rick Marinon,
Rick,
520
okay.
in Tulsa?
Nice.
We live 3 blocks from
Great.
Has your caucus officially taken a position on tribal sovereignty? Do you see yourselves as the defenders of tribal sovereignty?
Oh, we have been very vocal over many years, and even now, we have always supported the tribes and their sovereignty. Absolutely, yes.
I think I would say all the things that the governor spoke about starting, we already have. We already have partnerships with law enforcement and cross-deputization. These things are already in play, and we just need to continue to support them. It was fascinating that that it was implied that none of these things already exist. We've been doing them for years, and so that was a little bit lost on me.
It looks like you guys were largely supportive of the governor's points on criminal justice reform. Is that a potential hopeful for you guys meeting in the middle on that point, at least this session?
Yeah, we have always been proactive on our criminal justice reform efforts. It sounded a lot like what the governor was. It didn't sound like he was really proposing anything. It sounded like he was really just celebrating. But the piece around fines and fees and court costs and things of that nature, we would love to see fines and fees completely eliminated. But in order to do that, you have to fund the courts, which kind of contradicts his argument or his plan or his vision to cut income tax. And so, we will always find ways to work with the governor and our Republican colleagues on the things that we feel like make sense for everyday Oklahomans.
That was my question that Tyler took, yes.
So the one big applause that he got from us. Yes.
From the Oklahoma, and he talked in his speech like he's wanting some colleges and universities maybe to close and consolidate with others. I mean, where would you stand on that?
Well, I don't, and I mentioned this in some of my comments, I don't think consolidation is necessarily the path that we should be taking. Right now, like I said, there are serious concerted efforts to figure out how to make more investments in just deferred maintenance. We have $1.5 billion worth of deferred maintenance across our universities. When we're talking about building a workforce, in order to do that, you have to have buildings that students can sit in and learn in, and technology that is up to date with workforce and what students need to be trained on now. I have traveled across the state of Oklahoma during the interim, mostly our Russo schools and regional institutions. Those institutions are so vital to those smaller communities in rural Oklahoma, preparing students for healthcare and education. And so to consolidate, that is not the path to take for workforce development, economic development. And so there's, oh, okay. Yeah, true. Very good point. And like I said, over the years, the cuts that have been made to higher education, there's still so much we need to do in order to keep professors and staff members on campus and address tuition. I'm the first in my family to go to college. If it weren't for Oklahoma's promise and programs and scholarships, that I wouldn't be able to go to college. And so lowering costs is really important. And that's where I would hope that the governor would focus. And our Chancellor Garrett does a great job advocating for our higher education institutions. And so my hope is that he listened to the experts and not just push political rhetoric.
Today that was new.
That was new?
Yeah.
Can I answer this?
Sure.
I'm going to take your question, but I'm going to change it. Yes, sorry. What did I not hear? And what I didn't hear is the number one issue that we are facing as a state is access to affordable childcare. It was not mentioned one iota, and the fact that we have a issue that we hear on the doors, that we're hearing everywhere we go, and the governor doesn't address it is concerning, because that tells me it is not a priority. And if childcare is not a priority, then that means workforce is not a priority, because having access to affordable, quality childcare is workforce development.
And grocery sales tax.
Oh, yes. The grocery sales tax is not.
No surprises, basically.
Back on criminal justice reform, on the sentencing reforms that we've been working on, seems like 7 or 8 years now. How do we push that forward, since it seems like we've got some kind of consensus going on?
I think, I know that there was legislation, I think last legislative session, Mike Osborne was working on a bill that there was an agreement, I guess, between the House and the Senate on what exactly that looked like. And so my hope that whatever the parties are that are working together on that will come together so we can move forward. I know there wasn't language in there, so I think I can at least speak for myself. I didn't vote in favor of it because I'm not going to just vote for a vehicle that's just open and broad and doesn't provide a lot of details. But what I hope our Republican colleagues will recognize is that the issue on again, with workforce, you're leaving out a bunch of Oklahomans and a ton of people who want to and should be contributing to their society and be back in their community and living and thriving and living healthy lives. In order to do that, we have to figure out ways not to keep Oklahomans to continue paying their time, serving their time when they already have. It's time to restore and equip them with the tools that they need to be back in their communities and the workforce.
I was curious, so you talked a little bit about energy, but environment and natural resources were mostly missing from the governor's priorities. Do you guys have any goals about that you're looking at this session?
Well, you looked at me, so. Yeah.
5.1 earthquake. Well, we have Enel that came in this last session, bringing renewable energy, as well as the new hydrogen plant that they're interested in, where the tire plant is closing down. And so I think there are tangible things that we can be doing that trend towards sustainable, but we shall see. Yeah. Right now, we can't seem to get, thank you, Representative Waldron, we can't seem to get businesses to come here and stay. And so that, that's what I didn't hear also is, there are businesses saying thanks, but no thanks. And until we start to do some of these more practical, sensible things with education and workforce, that's going to continue. And unfortunately, environment takes a backseat.
Last year, lawmakers poured a bunch more money into common education in addition to doing the parental choice tax credit. I mean, was that enough, or do you think that we should be building on that again this year as opposed to having basically a flat budget for education?
Correct. We need to continue building. The whole idea of, what is the tangible cost to educate children? I think that's always that question. And we've not reached that, we don't know what that cost is yet. And I've heard some of my colleagues across the aisle say, well, we just can't throw money at this problem. And I'm like, well, why not? We haven't tried that yet. But here's the thing, when you up salaries for our schools, not just teachers, but staff, you are putting money pumping right into their local economy. That spurs everything. But they're related to the higher ed and our career tech and our two-year colleges. All of that, that pay has to go up because they're all in relationship. The one area that pay hasn't gone up is childcare workers. Sorry, I'm going to bring that up again. But that pay has not gone up. And we are seeing the detriment of our child cares because they do not have a living wage for their workers.
I think we can't ignore the rising cost of school property insurance as well. In the last 5 years, even in the last 3, costs for property insurance for schools has doubled, tripled, or quadrupled. Check your local school districts and just ask them for their number. And for many school districts, you're starting to see that becoming their number one budget expenditure versus dollars into classrooms. And this is, we're all feeling it. Property values are, property taxes are going up. Everything's going up at this moment, and we're starting to stabilize a bit, but those rates are really high. There are a few key pieces of legislation that are meant to help a little bit, but not in any sort of tangible way that brings those costs down. But until we do something about the school property insurance, it's not particularly fun to talk about, and it's not a headline grabber, but it's the thing that's taking the most dollars in a lot of our districts.
Sorry if I misunderstand the process. When it comes to the Board of Education and the new rules they established, they need legislative approval, isn't that correct?
Yes.
When does that come to a head? Is that in the committee process? Is that on the floor?
Yes.
And when do you expect to have a show of force there against all of these gender rules and accreditation?
So Representative Swope and myself sit on the Administrative Rules Committee for the House. For each emergency rule that is passed by a state agency, it must come to the legislature for final approval. The first stop is in the Administrative Rules Committee on the House and then on the Senate side. And then we actually dig in and go, okay, is the rule you cited appropriate for what you're wanting to do? It's going to be an interesting ride in that particular committee because last session some things made it through and were challenged but should never have gotten through, in particular with the State Department of Education. So we'll be continuing to challenge those things. Once they're voted out of committee, they come to the floor, and then they go on to the governor, and then they become approved law.
Is that House only, or is it Senate?
It's House and Senate, yeah. So and then we come together with a joint vehicle for voting on the floor. So
Theoretically, you could tweak whatever the superintendent has proposed when it comes to accreditation and gender rules and whatnot.
absolutely.
Any other questions? Seeing none. Thank you all so much for being here. We appreciate it very much.